Hello, everyone, and welcome to this weekly webinar produced by Business Performance USA. We're always honored to have you as our guests. You know, Business Performance USA is the producer of these webinars, and we offer them weekly to provide business insights on a variety of important business topics. So we have folks that are talking about background screening. We have folks that are talking about your management processes. We have folks that are talking about organizational excellence and leadership excellence and owner excellence. We have folks that are talking about social media. So you'll want to check in every week and become a member, and then you can view any of our topics from a week to week basis. We are an online business information exchange where you can meet people from across the U.S. engaged in these business conversations. And you may become a member and engage at no cost at any time. So just go to businessperformanceusa.org and become a member at no cost, and you'll be able to hear all of the webinars we have presented at a time most convenient for you. Today we are featuring Dr. Jefferson Stewart. He is giving us a short course to the long view, and this is part 2 in his Cycles of True Learning. I myself am Cynthia Stewart, one of the founders of Business Performance USA, and I have my own company, Evermore Services. I'm a managing partner, and I partner with you in building tomorrow's businesses today. I'm going to be your host for this hour. We may also hear from another of the founders, Victor Domingos, and I'm sorry I don't have his picture up, but he has joined us today as well. And now what I'd like to do is introduce your presenter, Dr. Jefferson Stewart, also known as Dr. Jeff. You know, Dr. Stewart has been serving Fortune 10, 100, and 1,000 firms for more than 30 years by focusing top leaders such as yourself on the critical dimensions of core intellectual properties and on timing rapid market entries for emerging businesses. His career to date in economic value creation is in the range of 14 figures. He has supported companies through IPO processes. He has supported companies in merging the intellectual property to build a greater company. You name it, he's done it. In fact, he served as a chairman emeritus for the National Advisory Council of the American Society for Competitiveness, where they brought together academics on the topics of competitiveness and what drove competitiveness, along with their corporate peers on the issues of competitiveness. And for over 50 years, Jeff has been serving as an ordained elder, and also for 30 plus years as an elder at large for his faith communities. He's also a loyal eagle of the Boy Scouts of America, and he has much to talk with us about. So without further ado, Jeff, what I'm going to do now is invite you to join us by featuring your presentation. So let me pass it over to you. So I'm changing presenters now, and you should be able to see a little pop-up, and we'll let you know when we see your screen. Very good.
Cynthia, this is Victor Domingos here. We're not getting audio from Dr. Jeff. You might need to check settings on the hardware.
To do that, how's this? Am I live now? Good. Appreciate that. I sometimes forget the settings have to be right to the moment. It seems amazing that I would forget that, since preparation is the key to almost every aspect of execution. But there we go.
And Jeff, if we could have you go ahead and go full screen.
I am full screen. Thank you. And what I'd like to do is remind you that this is the second in a series of 3 webinars. It's a short course in the long view, as they say. A brief introduction to strategic perspectives. And I'm doing this from the point of view of the cycles that we go through as we deal with strategy in the moment or strategic maneuvering. So last time I talked a bit about a lot of the angles that are more technical as well as more human that are involved with cycles of good living and product and service life cycles. Today I'm going to talk about cycles of true learning, and next time something that's a little more befuddling perhaps in business terms, but actually a key to the success of long-term businesses, cycles of beautiful loving. So let me go right to the topic today, cycles of true learning. What's at stake in cycles of true learning is where learning takes us. It's not so much where we've been, although it is some of that, of course. It's where we're going. It's our purpose. Learning goes beyond our self-disclosure in life, or even the disclosure of our capabilities and offerings in a business, to realizing what's better and more valuable now. And now is a term that I've put quotation marks on to indicate reserved usage. So, what?
So,
Excuse
Jeff,
me,
we are still on the slide that shows the 3, and we need to see the next slide. It's not
I have moved it up.
okay. So, why don't you send the screen back to me and I'll go ahead and forward, and I'll go ahead and
Move the
move the
slides.
slides.
All right, hang on.
Thanks, Jeff and Cynthia. What Jeff's talking about here is really a sequence of learning. So while we're making this shift in presentation, we encourage you to always look at past webinars that we've produced and future webinars as well, so you get the continuity of this learning cycle with all of our webinars. Cynthia, I'll turn it back over to you and Jeff.
Okay, I believe, Jeff, that you should be able to see cycles of true learning slide now coming through. Sorry, folks, we want to make sure. Sometimes we have a little bit of a problem, but we want to make sure that you're able to see the slides. So we should be on slide 4, cycles of true learning.
Sure.
So basically what's at stake is that learning, as I've said, goes beyond our self-disclosure. And since law now recognizes any form of legal entity as a self, as a person, in fact, it has recognized that for actually almost 2,500 years or more. But self-disclosure means what we do. It's what we promise, what we do. How do we keep our promises, and how do we realize value in doing so? So learning goes beyond self-disclosure, and it talks about realizing or making real what's better and more valuable now. The term now, as you see it on your screen, is in quotation marks to indicate a reserved use. And what I mean by that is that now can be different for different people at different times. So even you yourself will know that now while you're rising in the morning takes longer than now when you're on the phone with a customer, because you have other customers demanding. And in the morning, the only demand you have is habit and custom and getting to the next step. So now is a kind of plastic term that we use to indicate the parentheses we're willing to put around the time frames which are significant to us in the moment. So if you think about that, you realize that we're bound to have cycles, because as we move through our lives, if you'll change the slide, we take on a sense of continuity and contiguity. Now, these are difficult terms to explain, but they are difficult only because they're about decisions. That is, about deciding what to keep at and what not to do. So when we make decisions, what we do is we, at least temporarily, remove what is in our way and focus on the thing that's important in the moment. So the idea of continuity being at odds in some way with continuity shapes how we adapt our intent in business so that we can prove out our ability to deliver. And if you'll change the slide up for the next one, Cynthia, I can give a little more indication about that.
Just real quick, Jeff, we did have a question. By
Sure.
self-disclosure, do you mean being honest with yourself and others?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, the issue of honesty. Uh, Sometimes if we're put on the spot and somebody is in a rather hypercritical mode, honesty can be something that makes us feel odd or out of place or out of sorts or ashamed or guilty. But if we're honest in the context of a shared purpose, honesty becomes a form of authenticity, of empowerment, of something that allows us to reach out and touch others for value and to create value in their lives. It's all about keeping promises. So if we look at business, for example, we look at what I sometimes call the trinity of our business strategy, which is mission, execution, and business itself. That is the work that's in process as we go from one point to another according to whatever our plan of action may be. So on the inside, which you'll see on one side of the chart, we seem to see mission, execution, and business as a trinity, as a sort of free-floating set of decision-making pyramids that interact with each other. It's important to notice that there's a little golden triangle in the middle, because when people really get it together, that is, they either are contiguous in sharing their links with each other, or they are actually delivering, and in a continuous process, value is created. And that's what the golden triangle in the middle indicates. But it's in the middle because that's what everybody agrees on. If we want to look at the continuity involved, that is to say, our ability to shake hands with others and to create value and hand it on going forward, we have to look at it slightly differently. In this context, we approach something that we like to refer to in grandiose terms as linearity. Straight line view. I can see it right out in front of me. My mission is this, I do this to get it done, and I get value out of it and keep doing that and create more value. That's mission, execution, and business as a linear activity. And that's the way we, on the outside, are seen to be keeping our promises. On the inside, however, frequently we are in a more free-floating model where we're constantly adjudicating and redefining the interrelationships between those three functions of mission, execution, and business to create value for our customers and clients. Can we move on? Oh yeah, is there a question?
There is a question because you had posed contiguity and continuity, and I would want to say that the left almost shows the contiguity and the right shows the continuity. Would I be right in that?
Depends on which is left and which is right. I don't mean to be cute, but on
So the triangle, the view as
the three,
contiguity. The,
yeah, the free floating. Try to say that fast three times. The free floating triangles, that is to say, pyramids, represent contiguity. Links are shared in order to create value. But on the continuity side, what we're doing is managing relationship in the process of doing that with our clients and customers. So contiguity and continuity are often in a kind of dynamic opposition, or there's a certain set of potentially conflicting ambitions involved. The customer's ambition is to get more for less, typically, and to hang on to that deal for longer, and your ambition is to give less for more and to be able to upgrade the value of that deal faster. So therein, at the value creation level in a business, you find the basic dynamic expressed economically. Can we move on now? And I'll talk about that valuation behavior spectrum, because it turns out that if you try to treat everybody equal, including on the inside and the outside, that you are basically at maximum risk. On this particular slide called the valuation behavior spectrum, I'm pulling this forward from my last webinar, just as I did the preceding one. I want you to notice the bottom line. It's an interesting line because what happens is we're looking at a 100% situation across the bottom edge. That is to say, on the outside in, that is customer facing us, and on the inside out, that is us being in the business facing the customer. At the point of intersection where it's 50-50, risk is maximum. That's also true, by the way, if you look at how you relate to people. So let's look at the top line. Teamwork is the way we reduce or minimize the risk that we're at as we get going. Its focus is the fundamental issue there, and results is how we engage our team and build strength and character and trust. So teamwork itself is the controlling and disciplining factor at the same time on risk. What's interesting is that if you head more toward a partnering approach to teaming, you're focused more on discipline. And if you're headed more toward a transactional model, you are more engaged in control. So some situations, as you know, under crisis require significant control. In fact, we describe that as command control under great crisis or catastrophe. On the other hand, some other types of relationships require great discipline, because in order to respect what we share with others, that is the parts we play in other people's lives, partnering, we have to exercise self-discipline and expect self-discipline from others. In doing that, everybody reaches beyond themselves into a team identity, and that partnering, that role-playing, that sharing takes on about a 20 to 40% value headed toward the customer. And the transactions tend to be less frequent, but they tend to have higher value. And as a result, control is only required at great degree in things like logistics, which can be largely quantified and systematized. So let's look in the middle line and we'll, yes, what is it?
We do have someone that wanted
Dr.
to
Jeff,
go
Victor
ahead.
here, and Cynthia, pardon me for jumping in. Cynthia, you there?
Go ahead, Victor.
Thank you. Let me see if I can just tie this back real quickly so we can find continuity and throughout the webinar as well. So I'm coming back to self-disclosure, and I'm relating that to behavior spectrum, because self-disclosure is, or at least can be, a proper and valuable behavior. And when I look at all this, I think, and I apply to a workplace, I think sometimes there's simply no place to hide, if you will. One of the common human reactions, and I'm curious about your comment, Dr. Jeff, is both fear of being self-disclosed, is not knowing what you're doing at the moment, or not entirely knowledgeable. And that can go two ways. You can sort of, one could hide, or one could be open and self-disclose that they simply need knowledge and need learning, and that itself is a behavior for themselves and to the organization. Or you could, on the other end of the spectrum, you could be highly intelligent, highly knowledgeable, and share that freely and openly and self-disclose your knowledge. And you can use that as in a positive cultural way, or sometimes we observe people using it as, I have all the knowledge, I have all the power, and I will abuse those that don't. So am I on the right track of relating the self-disclosure to human behavior spectrum, and how it can either be a positive influence, or how it can be opportunities to create a culture to help people out?
Yes, you are. You're actually addressing the issue of the bottom line there, where I talk about risk, maximum risk, and where we work inside out and outside in. Everybody approaches an exchange of value from the point of view of minimizing their risk and maximizing their value. So you're at max risk if you're just face-to-face, 50-50, even off with each other. And that's true inside or outside, by the way. So typically in a business arrangement where you have multiple personalities in play and multiple teams in play, you have to do something about that. So what I suggested and have seen in many cases is that teamwork is the key. Now, most large businesses and international businesses figured out about 35, 40 years ago that without employees who are at least able to follow project guidelines in a team, that they weren't going to succeed in an accelerating marketplace. So as a result, teamwork became a high value within an organization, and those teams that were better than others were seen as outperforming uh, the teams that were not as good at following the rules. On the other hand, we discovered that the rules changed and tilted every time we got into working a project in the deal because time brings change, and or shall I say, in time, all things do change. So the contiguity, the ability to share links across teams, became as important as the hand-holding within a team. And people began to realize that we had internal customers as well as external customers. And in fact, the idea of reaching a high performance level in any team was the key to bringing contiguity, that is discipline and link sharing, into play with customers in mind. That is where value is exchanged and where control needed to be maximized and automated as much as possible so that we could focus on the human elements of getting transactions closed. The fact is that if you look in the middle, the key concept from an economic point of view is something called switching cost. And on the partnering end, switching cost is typically high. You build trust, you build value, you count on people, dependability is there, and as you do that, the exchange value in the market goes up too. So you don't want to really get rid of a team that's performing well without cross-training it pretty significantly and spreading it out. Because the switching cost is high. If you were to switch to another team, you might lose a significant amount of market share. You might lose an edge inside or something like that. And on the other hand, the transaction costs, switching costs on transactions is very low. We say, for example, if we're going to buy electric power, that it's all the cut rate that we're after. Well, it turns out that's not always the case, you know, and as you examine the marketplace and the vested interests involved, the community interests involved, and all the other stakeholders in the generation of power, sustainable power is the thing that's at risk for everybody, and without it, we have crises. Just look at Atlanta these days with the ice and the snow, and now the fear of electric power being lost as the second storm is coming on today. So I hope those are helpful in answering that I've done at least a fair job of getting at some of the issues you were raising, Victor.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff. Appreciate that.
Okay, can we move on? I think I'm going to beat this to death. I just want to pull this back up to remind you that we're talking about a total business here that works from environment as the world in which we execute our affairs, and the results are what make all the difference in the end. So without going into any great detail here, I wanted to bring up the mother of all slides and remind you that this is something we talk about increasingly, and we'll talk about increasingly for the months ahead. Basically, we have three loops in the middle: make, market, design, development, discovery, innovation, or what we now call in shorthand terms, go to market, design to adapt, and innovation. We talked about go-to-market and product life cycles last time. This time is about true learning and in many ways about design to adapt. And what happens in this is that we have intentions and purposes and we develop ways of going about them. But if we don't do that adaptively, then there's no way that we can execute in a changing environment. Next time, of course, we'll deal with cycles of beautiful loving, which is about innovation. So if we can move on, Cynthia. Thank you. This is, we talked last time a little bit about SCurves and a number of other curves, but I wanted to bring the SCurves back up and show you their application across the entire range of business and management as we've sort of built views of it over the last 100 years or so, actually closer to 150 by now. And I want to also point out that because that's a macroscopic view, it's a really big picture, that it applies at the microscopic level and, in fact, in very small businesses, in fact, micro businesses, in fact, solopreneur life. The S curves are critical to understanding what we go through when we start something and what it takes to capture the best from what's been done and move it forward into a normed value creation process called business and value or economic value creation. Um, don't think for a minute that your exercise of life itself is beyond economics. A lot of people are fond of saying, well, that's just about money. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Money is just about economics, and it's not the other way around. Um, so it's not just jobs, silly. It is the value created by the people in the jobs for the community at large. So let's not be stupid. Let's be smart, and let's look at a big picture. In the early days, a guy named Taylor started out by examining time and motion studies and created something called scientific management that a guy named Drucker, 50 years later, picked up on and developed, the 60-second manager. Control of function is what it's about. That is, if you're doing your job and doing it well, you need certain control in order to deliver. And we saw that understanding before. So I'm not talking now so much on the internal side as I am on the delivery to the customer. Although you got to understand, internally, we did everything we could to control and automate anything that affected a customer. So that's where control fits into information. So we developed systems to automate all the things that we could so human beings could be free to create the value that they need in relationship. And those systems have been talked about by lots of people, but most notably in the short term, people like Hammer and Senge and Kaplan and Nanaka and others. Controlling information turns out to be one of the ways we determine how honest we are. Is the data valid? How significant can it be said to be? What is the data requirement, the data set I need to make my decisions in this team, and what is the data set the customer needs in order to verify those decisions, for example? And we move on from there into issues of impact and and meaning. But we'll leave that sit for the minute and not talk about general systems, except to say that in the context of all of this, life moves faster and it seems to get a whole lot more complicated as we move. It's not just a matter of my saying, hey, I'm decades older than you and life and time moves faster for me. That's not what it's about. It's not that plastic sense of time. It is the clock time issue and the kind of clock we choose to live by. Now, we've gotten so precise that we use atomic clocks that are controlled by calculations based on satellite feeds on the disintegration of hydrogen in the sun. What? Yeah. If you have a clock that is set by some relationship to a satellite, the radioactive decay at the level of the sun is what is now determining how precise your machine is. That is the clock time that you measure in your life. We are fascinated by time, aren't we? So when we try to make sense of all that complexity, of all that fascination, we have to have the ability to situate our network of relationships. That is the contiguities, the links, and the continuities, the hand-holding, the handshakes. So if we can move on quickly, Cynthia, we move from mass collaboration basically into a discussion of how events occur. I brought up bell curves last time to point out that there are basically three kinds of views that we need to have. And the thing I don't want to have happen is for you to associate each one of these views with one or another of the aspects that I previously discovered. Statistics don't work quite that way in assignment. They're relative to everything. So each of these three bell curves relates to each perspective that I might have shared before. Within each perspective, there is a distribution of occurrences we can put brackets around and examine for focus. So if you look at the green curve, that's your standard slow bell curve. And That would be when everybody gets the least that it takes to satisfy their survival requirements, for example. Or if you look at the blue one, you'd say that would be a standard uh, moderate bell curve, and that's where everybody's sort of getting along and everybody's got something to do and everybody feels meaningful, and there's sort of those who really go farther than that and some who just are lagging to catch up and some just sort of muddling through. But if you look at the red curve, you see a curve of what we would call optimal focus. That is where probably somewhere around 98 or 99% of the occurrences that affect people's value in exchanges are focused on a single outcome. Now, sometimes we talk about this in terms of moments of great crisis. After 9/11, for example, leadership in all areas of the country sort of pushed itself into a sigma of .5 or better. And in that context, we had 95 to 98% of America headed the same way, and oh my gosh, we kept that going for quite a while. Not even the pundits of false dichotomy that we like to regard as political savants could break that forward momentum and that focus, and the results were clear. We were not destroyed by interlopers. So if I can move on for a minute, I think we can see that the bell curves apply to three things: our baseline, our change and continuous improvement process, and where we'd love to be. And it comes back to the issue of the team and high performance, whether it's a team as a company, a team as a smaller group within a company, a division, or a team that's on a project or program execution. Whatever we're talking about creating sustainability, not just getting by. We're talking in the mode of at least staying where everybody has enough to get respect and value and lifestyle out of things and move forward, and have some way to live and love and learn. Basically, there are steps for strategic excellence positioning, and we call those cycles of learning. These cycles of true learning occur when we don't do it too fast and we don't do it too slow. On this chart, just to pay attention for a moment to the yellow, green, and red lines, what we do is we understand that the green line in the middle is what's called a 40% learning curve. And it's highly competitive, and it's durable, and it's constructive. In fact, the constructive nature of it is durable. It's highly adaptive. And that's a world that we all want to be in today. Now, the reason there's kind of a green halo around that is because as you look at the value of revenues, you increase the degree of results and also the need for enhanced discipline. The wider the fan, the more the discipline in the organization has to be. And it's something that you just have to pay attention to. Now, at the red line, I just want to mention a caveat. If you learn too fast in the marketplace or in your organization or in your personal life, honestly, it becomes unsustainable even if you've got deep pockets. Even if your whole family's behind you and you decide to go out and barnstorm the market and launch your new hula hoop, whatever the particular trend of the month may be, and make a killing and come home and pay for the kids' college and wipe out the mortgage and make sure the car's got gas for the rest of your life. Hey, guess what? If you're pushing it too hard, too fast, it becomes unsustainable. It will not only threaten your relationships in family and among friends, but it'll threaten your relationships in the market. And when you run out of gas and you crash on the side of the road, or you knock a friend out of the way because you were so eager to get that last buck out of something, then what will happen is you will lose your ability to ride high in the market, and people won't hold you up as an example. Those are things, by the way, that sustainability means. So on a less personal basis, if you're in a company and you need to compete in a very high form, you can only get at a 60% better rate for a short period of time. Again, take 9/11. We could not sustain the cost of remaining the cosmic cop there for very long. And sustaining that cost is something we're now having to eat back home as a multiple of the value put out during that period. I won't stop to comment on how that kind of strategy plays out on a global scale and how the opposing forces in that strategy view that, but suffice it to say that the keiretsu of oil worldwide and the keiretsu of cash worldwide is largely at stake in both those things, and it is multinational in all cases. So it's very complicated, and we can't, any of us, get to the 60% learning curve and stay there for very long. Yes, there a question?
The question is how we might think of market velocity
Yeah,
and
honestly.
sustainability.
Yeah, that's great. Let me point to the yellow line, the last curve. When market velocity is too slow, that is when the speed to market is too long, the time to market is too long, you miss your window of opportunity. So the 20% learning curve reflects another kind of unsustainability. It's when you become forgettable. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say that zippers are the be all and end all of clothing closures. And that's how you avoid equipment malfunctions on stage or elsewhere. So you got to be zippy and you got to have a zipper. Oh my gosh, think of the marketing campaigns that can go with that. So you get all enthralled with your zippers. And you develop the best zippers in the world for every kind of use. Industrial, we're going to fasten the plates on buildings with zippers. Now look how cosmic that is. Is it going to work? Probably not. Way too expensive and very difficult to maintain. But nonetheless, somebody gets caught up in it and they throw everything they've got into it. They forget about everything else and they really go out there and they get it done. Wait a minute, what happened? Their learning curve in the market and in their own business and elsewhere from others went way down. They stretched everything out so long to get it done that they became unsustainable in the market. Why? Because somebody else came to market with a different solution, a different kind of fastener system for buildings, a different kind of fastener system for shoes, and so on and so forth. Does that mean zippers lost their market? Well, in danger of it, unless they get back into that closer to that 30 to 40% range. So basically, when you get 20% or less on your learning curve in a market, the velocity of cash slows down so far that nobody's really willing to invest in your future. Does that help answer the question? I hope so. Let's see what we can
Jeff,
do
that
with the
answered the
next.
question for me.
Okay, great. In this context, we have to look at benefits because in the end, every stakeholder owns something in every business environment or situation. So what we're doing under the ownership excellence idea here is examining briefly where perspective plays one more time. I just want to remind you that we've covered this in other webinars and we've done this fairly substantially. In every deal represented by two people in the tug of war at the top, that is from the inside out and the outside in, or from one member of a team to another or whatever, there is a line of sight that's at stake. And in that line of sight, we have different kinds of activities that get engaged, all sort of around the process model. Now, I typically talk about subject matter and technical, business process, and cultural processes. So I put them in relationship to each other. If you happen to be a great typist, you've got a value of 1, but if you add a business process to that called a typing pool, suddenly you have a value of 10, and if you organize an entire business around multiple very adaptive on-demand typing pools for people, you've got a value of 100. So the buck you put into learning how to type turns out to be $100 at any one point in time. That's the idea behind it. So your organizational culture is the key in the end to maximizing your value on that side. Now, if you look at the behavior involved on human beings and with money, you look at value creation down the line in terms of speed or velocity in the market. Uh, Victor's question about the velocity of a market or velocity of value in a market was well put, because that's the baseline for all activity. But when you have good control on delivery and you can handle all the changes and the curves and the things that come at you, that's called acceleration. Basically, you can move faster and more agilely. That kind of control, especially in logistics and distribution systems, will 10x your value. The same way the business process in that I described above. So what does it take to really max it out on the human level? It takes discipline, the ability to pull different senses of the moment together, to synchronize, so that you can get that $1 invested in velocity up to $100 invested in all parties who are working together to exchange value. Now, if you match value creation on the barrier removal side, subject matter, technical, business process, and cultural, with the value creation on the human side, where the market has a velocity that goes up and down, accelerates and whatnot, and where getting people together is important, you end up with a different kind of bar. That sort of deep blue or mildly purple bar that cuts across the blue block there, the waves of change, if you like, depicted in the blue block, is the actual payout potential in a live and developing strategic market. So if you stick with just velocity and technology or technical knowledge, you're basically buck for buck. And if I give you a buck, you give me a buck, do we get anywhere? Remember the parable of the talents, you know. If you don't bring back more than you were given, then you're not worth any more the next time around. That's the bottom line. So what we want to do is at least get our distribution and control in hand. But that's going to short sell us, you know, because honestly, if we make a buck out of every penny we spend, or $100 every buck, all we're doing is redistributing and inflating the marketplace. What we really have to do is bring discipline and organizational culture to bear on everything that we do. And that comes back to the business organization itself, where values are created, and when businesses go to business with each other, where human beings actually leverage every moment of their interaction to create what I would call a 10 to the fourth or 10,000x multiple. That is a potential. And that's where we see the value of our kind of economics. Let's move on now, because it's all about the balance of objectivity and subjectivity, and what I sometimes call the half-life of objectivity. You know, to do all these things, we have to be able not only to be engaged, but we have to be engaged with thought. We have to think not only of ourselves, but through the eyes of others, walk in other people's shoes, work with our hands on their hands and their hands on ours. So the half-life of objectivity is critical. I mean, you don't want somebody holding your hand the wrong way when you're trying to put a tire on a car, because that tire is going to fall and it's going to hurt somebody's foot. I could go on with a lot of more exaggerated examples, but the point is pretty self-evident. If you're going to hold hands, you better put the tire between you. And that becomes a matter of contiguity in the team, serving continuity on the drive. And that's really where objectivity becomes important. When you lose objectivity, you lose the ability to depend upon the organization that you're involved in, the team that you're with. Time then is the independent variable in all cultures, and I think that's a critical reminder. Everybody needs to remember that. And time, as we experience it in a human context, has both objective and subjective components. Can we move on, please? How does this play out? Well, it plays out typically over money, because there's a time value associated with money. First of all, take a simple example. I'm going to borrow a buck, and I'm going to go buy some Kool-Aid, and I'm going to put it out in a stand, and I'm going to sell it to passersby. And you know, if I figure out how to do that as a kid, I might make more than the buck that I borrowed. And the person that loaned me that buck, if they're smart, they loaned it to me and didn't just give it to me to waste. I'll learn that I have to pay them something for that buck because that's a buck they earned, and their earnings are now going to go to work for me. And if I'm going to borrow from what they're earning, I need to pay them something for what I'm taking from them, or it's basically another version of theft. Yeah, it could be a free gift. Maybe we gift somebody up front. Maybe we give them a free harbor. But the point is, in the end, you're going to put something in for what you get out. Otherwise, it won't keep coming your way. And the idea in this case is payouts. So when you get going and you go through it, you have to have an intent to adapt. And what I'm showing you is a graphic that came out of a proposal from one of our Eagles Wings team partners that went to a major company. And it's in a partnership with Dr. John Carnegie. And Dr. John Carnegie talks about adaptive design in the healthcare industry and basically has shown people how to save us. But people really have a hard time doing that, seeing past the blinders of their current pattern of behavior. So what this is about is getting you to understand that at the level where you actually do the work as you adapt in good teamwork, you will not only embed a scientific thinking. Remember the S-curve slide from earlier, where we talked about, scientific management. When you build that into the process of the work itself, where the value is added, then we are getting close to a 10,000x multiple over a strategic time frame. That is a very long time frame compared to the moment of adding value in a particular operation. This process works. It works very well, and it brings high value healthcare and competitive advantage forward as a sustainable offering to the market. Are there people trying to do it today? You bet, in all kinds of ways. But Dr. John Carnegie has figured out a way to systematize this that really reflects well on our international experience in the marketplaces as a nation, and our ability to work past contiguities into continuities, even with people that were former enemies and are now allies in many, many ways, specifically Toyota in Japan. Dr. Carnegie's gone in and figured out what the uh, so-called Western equivalents might be to the so-called Eastern mindset behind Toyota. It turns out there are some human equivalents that are key to the whole process. And if we respect the human equivalents, we begin to set up the basis for true multiples in value exchange. Let me move on, please, a little bit further. That's just an example, and I wanted to bring it up. It's going forward. Again, it's a total business perspective. I'm not going to go through it in any detail, just to remind you that we're coming forward on this over and over again over this year. And I'd like to move forward from that slide, please, from 13 to 14, or 15 to 16, excuse me. Here's where we're going. I'm going to tee up the next session because I want you to think about some ideas. Cycles of Beautiful Loving is a challenging title. What the heck does that have to do with business? I go to the movies on Saturday night with my girlfriend to see that, or with my boyfriend, or maybe with no friends. That was supposed to be humorous, but I'm probably in trouble for it. The idea of cycles of beautiful loving in business is tied to innovation. A lot of people think you can't measure the amount of love that you feel for your business, that maybe it's almost wrong to love your business, to love work too much. Oh my gosh, I'm a workaholic. Well, maybe not. Maybe your work is so value central to the economic structures that you're involved in, whether they're national or hyper local, that loving what you do and being loved by those that you work with is absolutely important to bringing innovation forward. This is not just survival, folks. This is thriving. This is where that halo of green expands around you as you move forward on a 40% learning curve that is perfectly sustainable with discipline. Now, by perfectly, I don't mean that we make things perfect. As I've said many, many times, my grandmother taught me, and it was a hard lesson to learn, it took me 30 years, that practice does not make perfect. Yes, you can perfect a circle, but you can't perfect a human. What you can do is approach that. And the better way to say it is that practice is perfect. By practicing constantly, by developing a life a learning cycle and a loving cycle that is focused in practice. We create a fulfillment, a perfection in the moment in which we engage each other and the marketplace and our life at large. So in our current world, it makes more sense to talk about thriving than surviving. Surviving is barely getting us anywhere. As redistribution has now proven for the nth time here in the US as well as around the world, it doesn't work well to create ongoing value. It's too slow, it's forgettable, and we lose track. We lose ground. We lose where we are. And in the end, we begin to wonder about the purpose of those that are trying to help us in those long sustained survival periods. Just getting a minimum amount to the maximum number of people does not give us a world. It gives us a shrinking world, yes, but it gives us a world where we shrink from each other in fear and occasionally in loathing. So the thriving that we seek in the world is what I mean by the thrival mindset. And I've been addressing some of the features of that in true learning and in good living. So what does it mean in our terms? Well, today we know that you have to have a position in the world, no matter what you call it, in order to deal with what's next. If I don't know where I am, how do I know how to manage where I'm going to? And if I don't know where I'm going to is, how do I know how to manage expectations around me and on the other end about when I might arrive? So geopositioning, as we talk about it today with our phones and everything else, whatever the political debates may be, is absolutely critical to thriving in this world. As we increase mobility and the individualization of mobility that we call the root of mobilizing our culture. Mobilizing all cultures. In fact, mobilizing free enterprise worldwide. Now, every definition of freedom is going to be a little bit different depending upon the cultural organization and the macro culture in which it's embedded. But as you free up individuals to become mobile and mobilize their ability to execute with a sure knowledge of where they are and where they're going and how to manage those expectations, you begin to get a culture that thrives. You begin to get a culture that demands 24/7 accountability, and the age of authenticity that Victor has so often spoken about becomes a global expectation. Now, this is what we're after, folks. And in the next one, I'm going to talk a lot about innovation and the global age of authenticity as an ideal state of human affairs, not an ideal state of politics. So cultural creation's at the center of this. Culture creation is something that's been an issue for almost 200 years, and it's had a lot of different names associated with it. But I'm going to break it down in our time to two things. The first on the left is where we start, centrality and eccentricity. Now you notice that I've spelled eccentricity without a second C, because I didn't mean to say eccentric. I wanted it to be eccentric. And I also didn't hyphenate it with a little e like I did in the second half of this little transformation model. What I did is I let it be big, because to be the center of all things is to be the big E, okay, to have the greatest power around from the point of view of the system. It is a system that centers on you and everybody else is centered on themselves, and oh my gosh, Ayn Rand is right. Ah! Somebody's going to blow you away for it. What do you do to change that traditional mindset and move forward? Well, we have tools at our disposal. I have hope. I have faith. I believe the human prospect is essentially optimistic. So when we look at that, we have a small e. The power goes to what? The continuous process. And we learn to create our links through the e-centralization of things. We can each be centers in our own worlds, and we can be connected. That is, we can be contiguous at the same time, and in effect decentralize almost everything that's going on. It allows us quite literally to reach beyond ourselves and our teams into the lives of others as far as we can build trust through results delivered and continue to deliver those results in an improving fashion. So I'll get to more of that next month when we talk about cycles of beautiful loving. Isn't it beautiful to consider the idea that we love our work and we love working with the people that we work with, and that we love delivering to the customers with whom we have agreements? Gosh, there's a lot of with in there, isn't there? I just like to be with you, and I like it that you're with me. Thanks a lot, folks. And
Jeff,
we'll
we
move
have
on.
a couple things,
Yeah.
and we have a couple minutes to sort of entertain these. When you're talking about cycles of beautiful loving, loving often people think of passion and love. And I am thinking maybe more, you're talking more about the love in action, love as an act. Talk to us a little bit about loving.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Let's look at that for a minute. Uh, I'm not talking about falling in love, folks. We all are falling. If we love living, we're constantly falling. Uh, Sometimes we spread our wings and soar. Sometimes we flap our arms and legs around like crazy and fly or swim. Sometimes we get a great steed and climb on their backs and move like crazy. These are acts of loving. They're things we love to do. They're things we love to feel. Does that change the passion that we have to something dispassionate? Only in the fact that we make choices. The objectivity involved in the balance with the subjective is key to making the choices it takes to make our acts loving acts. You know, I could give away $1,000,000 a day and be as dispassionate about it as the next, and only be good at redistributing what's already there or devaluing it by not allowing product and a service to exchange between human beings and increase that value on a gross domestic basis. But that doesn't solve my problem, does it? What it does is it doesn't even define the problem. It ignores the problem. It walks away from it and says, I have a solution that basically says the problem doesn't exist. Well, that's like kind of saying, throw me in an oven and I will walk out. Angels will walk me out. Well, we know about that story. If you read the good book and you go back far enough, there's this story about uh, people who stood for what they believed in, and a leader who was misled by others for their own private ambitions. And then those who stood for what they believed in were put to the ultimate test, and they ended up walking out of the fire unharmed, and, you know, took a place of august and supreme authority in the world of the corrected ruler. It's a heck of a story, when you think about it that way. But what I want to tell you is it's all about acts of loving. Sometimes the act of loving is almost an act of faith in defiance of that which is faithless. That which distrusts and doesn't hold respect for the rest of the world can often seem to be destructive and, in fact, almost evil. And when that happens, we have to stick by our guns, as we say. We have to be faithful, and we have to build trust, and we have to move from that, and we have to work for the illumination of those who are watching the events, believing they have the right course, only to realize they have to be corrected. Because true leaders inevitably take correction from those that serve them. And I think that's what we're about. Time then. I'm at the close. I think I've delivered a little more than I promised on the end of this with that question. I hope that if I've offended any of you, that you'll call me up directly and tell me about that. But basically, I'd like you to look forward to Business Performance USA. Go check it out and join it. It provides a safe harbor and the ability to exchange your business information in a secure environment. Next month, we're going to see a presentation on continuous improvement, and we look forward to your continuously improving our work at Business Performance USA. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jeff, for wrapping it up. And folks,
Thank you, Doctor.
we hope that you'll look to become a member of Business Performance USA. And as we close today, let me just give you a quick view of that website. and you'll see that little button, Become a Member, and you can go out and become part of the community, log in, and you'll notice a very familiar Facebook kind of look to this, and you can engage in the conversation and view all of these webinars. And Victor, did you have one more thing before we close?
Cynthia, no, I really appreciate Dr. Jeffs, and I would interpret this as if we bring our love to the workplace. And my interpretation that with all HR compliance considered, that we love our fellow coworkers in a way that we want them to succeed. We're willing to share our knowledge and learn from them as well in a way that's open and supportive, and so that we all grow and prosper. That's my interpretation.
Great interpretation. So thanks, Dr. Jeff, for your wise words and walking us through some things that we're familiar with but don't know always how to apply from a business perspective. So we appreciate that. And thanks, Victor, for your comments. And with that, we will close today's webinar and look forward to hosting you back next week for continuous improvement. Thanks, everyone. Go out and make it a great day.